All right, good afternoon, folks. This is Faris with Trade with Tex. Today we're going to kick off the second video here of the new weekend chart prep series that we are replacing the weekly newsletter with. So just for those of you that are familiar with the weekly newsletter, we used to put one out free every weekend. Now we're going to have more visuals and just do a weekend chart prep video that I do regardless every weekend to prepare for the upcoming week. Okay. And just to be clear, this is not an educational video, right? We do have educational ones on the YouTube channel as well, but this is just a video to kind of tell you what I'm looking at, give you a watch list of momentum stocks, futures as well, and then you can pick 1 to 3 tickers based off of your preferences and your trading style to watch for the upcoming week. Okay, so let's kick it off. We are going to be talking about a similar list to what we discussed last week, but with a couple of the momentum names swapped out, and mainly we're going to cover the NASDAQ instead of the S&P. Now, again, you can trade options, futures, ETFs, whatever you feel comfortable with for the NASDAQ, but I feel like this gave a cleaner read than the S&P, and really the whole point of the weekend chart prep is to have an idea of what is going to happen in the upcoming week, right? Not necessarily predict things, but just get an idea of the trend, right? And the key levels. Okay, so support and resistance. So for that matter, it's pretty easy to read the trend here on the NASDAQ. We're looking at the 1 year, 1 day time frame here, and that's one of the couple of time frames we're going to be using. So the daily, right? Pretty easy trend to read. Basically, since price is above the 8 EMA and the 8 EMA is above the 20, that means that we're in a bullish trend, and a pretty strong one, right? Because whenever we have the 8 above the 20 like that, and they're both aggressively sloped, that means we have a strong trend, right? Whether that's above or below, doesn't matter. Okay, so trend obviously still intact from this past week. Kind of our outlook from last week was just that since we defended the 20 EMA, we were looking for a pop up and a higher high, right? Because what this looks like is this higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low. And we're not just talking about moving higher in general, we're talking about from the previous one. So you could see higher low, and that is what was formed going into this week, so we were looking for a higher high. That played out, and the tricky part going into next week, now you can kind of tell, is that the risk to reward isn't as good. Now, to be clear, because the trend is still intact, I am still bullish going into the upcoming week, but we're not down to the 20 EMA or even a bigger support level, which would warrant some more swing trades on the long side. Okay, so you can hold any swing trades on the long side, you can hold this on the long side, but risk to reward isn't as ideal as last week, just because we haven't pulled back as much off that recent swing high. Okay, now that being said, there are a couple of easy levels to spot here on the daily before we switch it over to the hourly. So again, this is the 1 year, 1 day. All right, and then we're gonna look at the 20-day, 1 hour to look at 2 different time frames because we're trying to focus on price and get a read on it. Okay, so based off the daily, really easy read, right? Resistance is up here at 9,500 roughly, right? It's 94.97, and let me write these out so I can erase this. 94.97. Okay, support coming from the 8 EMA, this recent swing low, which is at 92.41.5. Oh, wrote that wrong. 92.41.5. So far we've just used moving averages and historical levels. And then the next big support area is down here. So really this is where we would have the ideal risk to reward. I wouldn't really be opposed to a reset and just a pullback to that area. But we would need to crack this zone before that happens. So the make or break for bulls on the big picture would be down here. Short term would be up here. Okay. So roughly 9,300 and then 92.41.5. Okay. And for bears, they need to defend 94.97 or else this thing has some immediate upside, and we can kind of zoom this out to see where that is. Technically, we have a smaller level up here closer to 9,600, but really, as crazy as this sounds, it would be to the all-time high. There's not a whole lot of resistance left. And I'm not saying that you should be cautious as we get closer to the all-time high. Just keep making sure that you have sufficient risk to reward if you're swing trading actively or looking at these indices. Okay, so short term, as I mentioned, on the daily, we can see resistance here and then support here, here, and here. And if we move it over to the hourly, it's actually an easier read, in my opinion. What the hourly shows us is this resistance, all right, smaller resistance, smaller support. That's the first big support area right here. So I'll label them resistance, support, and then the 20-day is down here. All right, so this is the area we would like it to reset to, but realistically, we're gonna test 94.97 before we get down there. All right, because we're closer to it and we're in a bullish trend. Okay, now keep in mind that we're off on Monday too. So normally when we have a holiday and that 3-day weekend, we'll get lower volume throughout the week. So last week's volume was kind of inconsistent, and we played that to our advantage with options, meaning that we took advantage of the lower premium, right? We had some really nice percentage winners. But next week is probably going to be consistently low volume. Okay, I hope that's not the case. Just be aware of it. Things might be a little bit slower. Okay, so you can see the other key areas that I'm looking at here. You can annotate them, right? 93.45.5. 94.16.5, and this is a video, so you can pause it and roll it back. But bottom line, the big key areas here: 94.97, this support down here, right? 8 EMAs at 9,300, so it's moving up. It's a zone, right? Not just one level. And then that big zone down there. Okay, so 3 big zones to watch for the NASDAQ. So far, it is still bullish, and our call out for last week worked really well. We had a very aggressive bullish move, okay, especially on Monday, which is a little bit unusual. All right, so NASDAQ in a bullish trend, watch those areas. And actually, the last thing I'll say, the reason I'm not just taking last week's high here is because last week's high was a rejection of the previous resistance. So it's the same thing for when we go up and form a double top on anything. I'm not saying that's what this is, but we're not looking at this level, we're looking at that one, because that's the one that rejected that one. Okay, that's the logic here of using 94.97. All right, now a brief mention here of crude oil. We're not just going to talk futures, right? But I did want to mention that crude oil is resetting text on the daily, and this is actually such an easy read, right? And this is the point of the weekend prep. We want to get an easy read on these charts. We want to focus on the stocks that are a little bit simpler, rather than the ones where we pull them up and we say, you know, I don't know about that one, right? So crude oil, easy read going into next week, in the sense that we have this massive candlestick, and I'll show you the volume a little bit more here too. We have this massive candlestick from Friday, right? Which came down to the 8 EMA. So we already know where the big support is. It's the same thing with the markets, okay? Short-term support at the 8 EMA, and then we could not hold above 33.68, which if we roll this oil chart back, you can see that 33.68 is resistance from here and here, right? Held us down a good bit. So 33.68 to 34.66 is the big resistance zone next week. The reason I'm talking about this for oil, I'm not saying that this is a clean-cut buy signal. I actually think that it's the opposite. I think that this could turn into a sell signal and a bigger pullback in oil short term, right? Because the big picture is obviously still turning around, but short term, if we don't defend that 8 EMA. So I really just wanted to emphasize, for crude oil, the range is defined between this support and this resistance zone going into next week. We closed closer to the resistance, which is a good sign. It's still in a bullish trend, but just keeping it simple, right? Crude oil needs to defend that area, or we will immediately slide down to 29.13. All right, low 29s. So first pullback, first technical reset on the daily. The dip got immediately bought up, but that volume is something that's a little bit scary because you do not want to see high relative volume on a pullback. Okay, so just be cautious with oil going into next week. I know everybody and their mother is talking about energy plays, but a little bit cautious and watch that 8 EMA. Okay, technical reset for crude. Now, let's get into the more interesting part of things, because futures can only be so exciting, right? It's just one ticker over and over. There are a lot of stocks that stuck out last week, and I think one of the more important themes that I kind of noticed this weekend when running my scans and looking at different momentum plays was not to necessarily reflect and recap, but to look for opportunity, right? And that line is a bit tricky for active traders. So personally, I think opportunities where all the money's at. It's good to trade the same tickers over and over, but you can only do that so much. Like Nvidia, Facebook, pot stocks, they all ran up big last week, but that's not necessarily the best list going into this week. So I actually scrapped a lot of those. We'll talk pot stocks soon though. I scrapped a lot of those. And the couple of momentum movers that I'm looking at going into next week that are a little bit slower, it might need a little bit of a kick in the ass to get going here. Tesla and CHWY. Both of which are pretty controversial stocks. So let's start out with Tesla here, because this is one that I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for no matter what I say about it. This is the daily chart for Tesla, and to be clear, it hasn't shown the strength that I want to see yet. The reason I'm even bringing it up is because of the higher low that was formed, a week and a half ago. And as we know, Tesla just randomly lights up if it's in a bullish trend. And some of you guys might disagree with that, but that is a fact, right? That is a known fact. Tesla has these very aggressive moves out of nowhere that are usually just shorts being trapped, right? So for me, I saw a little bit of strength on Thursday. It was called out by a couple of people in the Trade with Text chat room. And this is the paid chat that we're talking about, $50 a month. We do have a free week trial, but I'll mention that at the end of the video. So basically, a couple of people called out Tesla on Thursday, and that really caught my eye. And then Friday, it didn't follow through. It set up a couple of times, but it didn't actually break higher. So this is Thursday. That was Friday. And what really sticks out to me about this chart is this low and this low, right? Because we were calling for a move up to 843 on Tesla a couple of weeks back. It hit that, then came back and formed a higher low, and hasn't done anything since. So based off of the daily, and then if we look at the weekly, which has a pretty indecisive candlestick, there's one thing that still sticks out to me here. And that's the fact that we are closing higher. A higher close. Because basics of what we're looking at, price, is supply and demand, right? What people are willing to pay and what people are willing to sell at. For Tesla, what this week shows is not a ton of strength, but just enough to put it back on the radar because sellers are drying up a little bit, right? It was a low volume week and the closing price was higher. So these are kind of the sneakier formations that you're not really going to notice unless you're checking these stocks regularly, okay? That's where the weekend prep comes in. So basically what I'm looking for this week, and the tricky aspect of this is the time frame. So 1 to 2 weeks, not necessarily within the 4 days of this week, right? 1 to 2 weeks, I'm expecting Tesla to retest 843 at the very least, and then head up to this resistance zone, which is 869 to 886. Okay, the last thing that I'll say for this, because again, Tesla, the general idea here is that we're just going to pop right back up to 843, get that big test, and potentially break out. The last thing I'll say is that this is a tricky chart when you're drawing your fibs. I want you guys to have all of the levels planned out here, not just the targets. So when you draw your fibs, draw them from 886 down to this low. Okay, because again, we're expecting this to pop up in 1 to 2 weeks, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to get a pullback. And if we get a pullback, that would be a good entry point, right? So for me, I'm not only thinking about the exit, I'm thinking about the entry. What would get me to pull the trigger? Either a break above 843 or for a pullback to the nearest fib, which is down here at 808.62. And that should really stick out more to a lot of you guys because the best possible scenario is for a drop to support, pop up to resistance, not to chase the stock. Chasing is horrible. Sometimes you got to make that call and give into the FOMO and actually chase a stock, but we'd much rather buy it at support. So for Tesla, looking for a buy off of this fib, you get that fib from drawing your levels from 886.89 down to this low here, which is at 683.04. And to be clear, I hate Tesla as a company. and I don't really throw that word around a lot. I don't like the company whatsoever. I think Elon Musk is an interesting guy. I don't think he's a great CEO. Just go on his Twitter if you don't believe me. And I'm all for this stock, losing market share over time. But we're just following price here. And I don't care if this is Tesla, Walmart, some, crap penny stock. I'm going to trade price. Okay? So price is saying that this would be the big support, 808.62. Alert trigger would be over 843 for a pop-up to this zone. Okay? Now, moving on to the next ticker, CHWY, which I guess is a popular stock now. I saw this one in my social media scans a lot this past week. And I use those scanners regularly for just intraday momentum setups. But the social media scans kind of give a good idea of how crowded a stock is, or whether or not it just is popular enough to really get going. And for a lot of the blue chip stocks, for a lot of the big names, they're always, going to have plenty of volume, plenty of eyes on them. CHWY is pretty inconsistent, and that's one thing that sticks out about this chart. Really the only downside that I can think of, if we're trying to be unbiased here. See how spotty this volume is, right? That means that chasing could be pretty deadly for this stock, right? Because if it breaks above resistance, it might not have enough volume to follow through. So first thing before we even get into price, make sure that if you do trade it, it has relative volume. Okay, meaning that the volume is actually above the average volume line, and that's a discussion for another time, right? Bottom line for CHWY, what really stuck out to me is the bullish options flow, right? It had a ton of big call buyers over the past 2 weeks, not even just one. On top of that, the close on Friday was perfect. You really could not write a better story here, meaning that on top of that bullish options flow, that strength came in, and even though it wasn't the most volume, which is what we would have liked to see, we got a stochastic crossover, right? So text lining up on the daily here. And we also crossed the 20 EMA, which sticks out to me more than anything on this chart. Okay, 20 EMA. Now, the reason why that's significant is because CHWY hasn't really been trending since, what is this? Right here. So late April, so about a month, it hasn't done anything. You could argue, well, Faris, it came down to support and then bounced, but doesn't matter. Didn't do anything. If you watched it every day for a month, you were just watching paint dry. So bottom line, when we cross back over or back under the 20 EMA, we are indicating a move to the upper or lower Kelt. Same thing works for Bollinger Bands, but in this scenario, we want to use Kelts because it has a little more momentum to it. Okay, we're not looking for a range-bound name. So that's a little more advanced, but it's basic trend analysis. When we cross above or below the 20, we're going to go to the next deviation, the next Kelt. The indicator here is called Keltner channels, by the way, if you want to pull them up on your chart. I'm sure a lot of people have already heard of it, but just in case, that's what it's called. So bottom line, it's indicating a move to this yellow dotted line up here, 45.42. And what I really like about this chart, the reason we're even discussing it, is because I feel like for these videos, it's hard for people to actually see the move and then pull the trigger. I don't want you just to buy a stock because I went over it. I want you to know why you got in, when you got in, based off the chart, right? So we crossed above the 20, but the absolute confirmation would be for a move above this high right here, which is at 43.18. Okay, 43.18. So next week, I'm actually going to set the alert, even though I'm sure it'll gap up over it. I'm going to set the alert above 43.18. If that hits, our first target is going to be 45.42. So many damn fours. And then 47.55. And notice just at a glance, right, the last question that you got to ask yourself before you pull the trigger, does this have sufficient risk to reward? And we can see where our risk is to, right, the 20 EMA. So that's 41.50. So just at a glance, you can see difference here is about $1.70. Difference here and here is, what is that, 230? And then 430, roughly. So even at the first target, if you were to size out, that's still barely sufficient risk to reward. Second target would be ideal. Okay, so for CHWY, we're looking for a larger move this week. We'll see if that plays out. Again, to simplify this, this is the trigger price, 43.18. Target 1, target 2. All right, text lining up, good options flow. We just need that volume to stay consistent and we're golden. Okay, and I wanted to kind of mention, so CHWY and Tesla are going to be a couple of my focus stocks for next week. At the end of last webinar, the last weekend prep, the first one that we ever did, we talked about some momentum plays to look at. I realize that not everybody trades penny stocks or even mid caps. A couple of tickers that I'm just going to be watching kind of on the back burner, right? You don't have to watch these. Let me list them out real quick. Seal, it's a low floater. Okay. GLXZ, Galaxy Gaming. This is actually a Bowser Report stock. If you haven't heard of the Bowser Report, it's a newsletter that I produce content for. I'm the editor. It's a long-term investment newsletter. So if you don't day trade or swing trade, you might want to check that out. It's a very, very cheap. It's like $9 a month. But GLXZ was one of our old picks, and it's setting up really nicely. We'll go over that one. VUZI, which I really don't like this company, but the chart is potentially setting up. And then I'll mention some earnings movers briefly. So it's a long list, but just so that you guys can have some alerts set in case they end up triggering and setting up. Okay, so Seal here, brief mention, this is an old low float runner. The larger time frames look like garbage, right? You guys can kind of tell by now. I'm pretty blunt. I don't really care if something's bullish or bearish or what you think about the stock or what the markets look like. I just care about price. So larger time frames, crap, they don't look good. Short term, it's actually ramping up a good bit after earnings, and we also crossed a couple of key moving averages. So just a brief mention here on Seal. I'm going to set the alert above a daily fib here at 135. If it breaks that, it's got at least 10% of upside. Okay, this is a key fib retracement. It's a basic key level breakout play. If it can hold above 135, then we have at least 10% upside. And I'm not going to spend half an hour clicking that. There we go. All right, 135.56. Okay, GLXZ. So let's erase Seal from this list. We set the alert so we don't have to watch it as closely. GLXZ, Z, not C. I think I misspoke there. Is a bottom bouncer. The Bowser Report finds stocks that have good fundamentals and have some kind of opportunity. So we initially bought the stock, I think, at like 70 cents, something ridiculously low, and then sold the majority of it in the twos. But now it's taken a hit, right? Galaxy Gaming, this is casino and gaming software company, took a hit with a lot of those casinos, and it's bouncing off the lows. So I already know the company. I actually like it, but not to drink the Kool-Aid, just to follow price. It's breaking out over a supply zone. And by supply zone, I just mean that this is where sellers have been sitting for quite a while, right? Ever since March. So it dropped down below these low ones right here. We had a gap to fill. Then it came back up to that zone and it got rejected. And this was not a small rejection. And a lot of times you can find the support and resistance even if you don't know where the fibs are or if you don't have that much experience, just by seeing where the bigger moves were off of. So see how big of a drop this was, and then see how big of a drop this was. We can tell that that's a big resistance zone, right? So for GLXZ, we have now broken above that zone as of Friday on relative volume, meaning that this should be a really aggressive mover, right? So targets for GLXZ next week are going to be, oh, switch the color there, 126, 145, and 159, which sounds absurd, but you kind of get the logic here based off the resistance break. Okay, should be a very aggressive mover as long as it stays above that zone. Okay, so GLXZ, another ticker that I'm watching, and I'm not going to set the alert for that because I mainly just want to watch it to see if it holds the low ones. Okay, Bowser Report stock right there. VUZI, I hate the company with a burning passion. I hate the cult following. Literally, whenever I talk about this on social media, it's usually saying, hey guys, this stock is moving. And then I'll tweet again, on the Trade with Tex Twitter, and I'll say, hey, the stock is likely going to cool off from here. So Friday, we played it long and short in the chat. We played both ends, which was awesome. And then afterwards, I looked at the chart and I said, hey, there's a pretty easy make or break here, right? This chart could actually follow through, whether it's a week from now, a day from now, a month from now, if it can base above this key fib at 293. So you can see a lot of what I'm looking at for next week are just basic Fibonacci setups, okay? So 293, I'm going to set the alert above that. If this stock can base above it, so actually form a higher low above that key level, then it should easily be able to run up to the 340s, which is 15 to 20% of upside. Okay, nice and simple there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, which I did not prepare too well in advance here, just in terms of pulling this up on the screen share. So we're off on Monday, but we still do have a lot of earnings next week. A couple of the ones that I'm looking at here, just to give you an idea, we have a bunch of China stocks reporting. Again, you can just see at a glance, right? VipShop, NetEase, I think, NetApp, just a bunch of those names. One of the China names that sticks out to me is NIO, right? Which has an incredibly high short interest. Again, kind of like Tesla, just a failing company, a company that is not doing well. They got a horrible business model, but they've recently put out some crazy high estimates, which I don't really believe. But if they even kind of touch on that briefly during the earnings call, that stock's going to get a big push. So this is more of a buy the rumor, sell the news play. The other thing I wanted to briefly mention was Canopy Growth, CGC, reporting on Friday. And going into this week, I still like pot stocks. Only issue I have is that pot stocks are not really known to hold gains well. And again, completely unbiased, right? We're just looking at what history has told us. Pot stocks have a lot of bag holders. They're not going to let it run for more than 2 to 3 days at a time before selling them back off, right? They may run afterwards, but to me, for pot stocks this week, it screams buy the rumor, sell the news. So to be clear, I would rather play the long side. I would rather buy these and then sell them. However, if you do play them, you have to take your profits very quickly. Okay, you should not be sticking around for multiple days. So CGC, let me actually show you this chart in the background here. We talked about this on Friday in the Trade with Tex chat room. Basically, we're still looking for a pop up to the 20 area. We have heavy resistance there, historical level, and the 200-day. It's pretty close, so not that much upside, but that's going to be the big target area for next week. Okay, 19.99. So it reports on Friday. We'll see what those numbers actually indicate because the ACB report recently was good. But this is one of the pot stocks that I'll be looking at. Plus, it's good to gauge other pot stocks with, right? You take one of the industry leaders, that usually trickles down and shows us how the rest are going to perform. Okay. And then last thing I'll say, so for earnings, and then we'll kind of wrap it up here. Final thing I'll say, so mentioned NIO has some day trade potential, horrible company though, so be careful with that one. CGC, buy the rumor, sell the news. And then a couple of others. I hold Costco long-term. It's one of my biggest long-term holds. I'll be watching that solely for that reason. But it does have some good option setups based off of lower premium. Okay. I like NTNX for a run up into earnings. We'll see how the report goes. Expectations are high. So it's probably going to, again, buy the rumor, sell the news. And then I thought we had HP reporting. Where's HP? Hewlett Packard. I think I'm just blind here. Hold on. How am I not seeing this? Dell, so HP should be reporting around then. I don't know. Regardless, HP is reporting in this upcoming week, and HP has had a ton of bullish options flow. Okay, a ton. And I mean millions and millions and millions of dollars pouring into out of the money calls for this stock. So regardless, HP is going to be one that I'll be looking at next week. Okay, so for day trades, I'm mainly going to look at this, and HP. Okay. And we'll keep it that simple. So a lot of tickers, remember the goal of these videos is to help you just narrow down 1 to 3 that you want to watch. Like if you trade options, you might gravitate towards Tesla and CHWY. If you trade earnings movers, you might gravitate towards NIO and HPE, right? But I tried to kind of put a little bit in there for everybody. So this is the second weekend recap video. If you got any questions, if you got any comments, we had some really good questions on the last video. Feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There are educational videos too, if you missed them. And most importantly, if you want to learn more, we have a free week trial for tradewithtex.com. And in the chat room, we have audio, screen share, where you can actually see my screen throughout the day, and I talk it through and I say what I'm looking for to kind of help you learn as much as possible. And after that free week, it's just $50 a month. You're not locked into it. You can cancel after the free week, but hopefully you can at least learn something for free over the course of 5 to 7 days there. Okay? We got a bunch of new people last week, and they seem to be pretty damn happy with it. A lot of them signed up. Okay? But come see for yourself. Either way, have a good weekend, folks. It's a 3-day weekend, so let's make the short week count. All right, let's make some money. Have a good one.